Hello YouTubers! Welcome to Big Buddha is Watching. I'm Big Buddha and today we're on to Red Dwarf 6, Season 6. And like in my 5 reviews, a bit of old school memorabilia for you, the old VHS tapes. Episodes 1 to 3, episodes 4 to 6. So, Red Dwarf 6 from 1993. An all change series. It really set a precedent for the next two to three series, which was really, after 5 series and the same formula. Three series from 3 onwards to through to 5. You really have the same formula, the same location, set it all aboard Red Dwarf, the same group of characters. There was a risk around about the sixth season that of Red Dwarf sort of lapsing into formula in a way, and like in between series 2 and 3, a change that was needed to give the show new life, to reinvigorate it slightly, which I think is an important thing to do with sitcoms, because sitcoms can run the risk of becoming a little staid if they're not careful, because sitcoms do tend to be about characters sort of trapped in the same situation on a weekly basis. And you can run the risk of them becoming repetitive and sort of lapsing into formula, and then almost losing touch with reality, because in reality we don't all stay put in the same situations for years on end. So I think a lot of the best sitcoms that have had longevity, there's a reason that there's only 12 episodes of Fawlty Towers and 14 episodes of The Office. It's because those sitcoms are really lasted because they really just focused on one period of time and one group of characters who were just in that situation at that point in their lives. If those sitcoms had gone on at all, then they'd have, the formulaic nature of them would have started to show. The longer running sitcoms that have really had legs, I think, are the ones that have developed over time. Only Fools and Horses would have been a prime example. Only Fools and Horses, you got 6 seasons of the same formula. The 3 main protagonists, Del Boy, Rodney, and Grandad in the early seasons, and then Uncle Albert after season 3, I think. And then a change had to come. So I think it's season 7 of Fools and Horses. They rejigged the formula. They developed it. They had the boys. They gave them girlfriends. They found love, and this led to other avenues, fresh avenues for the characters to explore, with them, Rodney going to work for his father-in-law and moving out of the flat, and Raquel moving in. They also rejigged the format slightly from going from making longer episodes, going from 30 minutes to 50 minutes, and then various specials which were 60, 70, 80, 90 minutes in some cases. So that's just shaking that formula up. It felt exciting and it felt realistic. I think that's part of the reason that Del Boy and Rodney are beloved British characters, at least on British TV, is because they feel genuine, because they developed in a genuine way, in a way that a lot of people could relate to in real life. Trying to think of another example. I mean, Men Behaving Badly did it slightly. I think they slightly rejigged in series 6, where having Tony and um, Deb get together and having Gary and Dorothy get married in the season 6. So 6 seasons seems to be sort of the limit where you can really rely on formula, and after that you've really got to develop the characters, or do something different. This was the trap that Peep Show fell into, I think, which wasn't as good after the 6th season, because they didn't develop it at all. By the final episode, the two characters were still in exactly the same situation that they were in the first episode. So Red Dwarf is no exception. A change had to come, and I think the writers were really smart in the fact that they basically looked at where they were at the end of the 5th season, what was working, what they were relying on, and jettisoned what they didn't really need. One thing that became apparent was that the setting of the series was shifting less and less from being on Red Dwarf. They were doing more and more episodes on Starbug, because it was easier to get to stories in a transport vehicle than it was on to say have Red Dwarf the stories come to Red Dwarf, if you like. So they decided in series 6 to set it entirely on Starbug. The story of season 6 is Lister has lost Red Dwarf. He couldn't remember which planetoid he left it around, and it was stolen by forces unknown. The force unknown, you wouldn't really find out what it was until the end of season 7, and even then I still don't think I really understand what it was that actually stole Red Dwarf. So Red Dwarf's gone. It seems funny to call a show Red Dwarf when it's the actual craft doesn't feature in the show. So the story takes place 200 years later, and Lister in the first episode wakes up. He's been in cryogenic stasis, not actual stasis like he was in the first episode. Cryogenic stasis, which, I mean, has preserved his life, but for some reason his hair and fingernails have still grown. So the crew have been chasing Red Dwarf now for 200 years and waiting for the opportunity to catch up with it. So the Rimmer's his Lightbee's been frozen in ice, and Cat's been in cryogenic stasis as well, and so it's just been Crichton who's been piloting Starbug and chasing Red Dwarf for this whole time. So that's the big change for season 6, is that shifting the stories entirely onto Starbug, and indeed this was maintained in series 7 as well. Doing this also had an effect in meaning they could make another change, which was slowly becoming apparent through. Which was the excising of Holly, getting rid of Holly as a character, which I was sad to see go, because I liked Hattie Hatridge, and I liked the Holly character. But the problem with Holly was that in the early seasons, Holly was there for exposition. He was basically there to explain the plot, but that as a function was really superseded with the introduction of Crichton, who could do all the exposition and the examining stuff and saying "Beskis," sir. So Holly really became a superfluous character who was really, who since Crichton came along was really only there to sort of deliver the odd one-liner, and it's quite apparent, at least in season 5, where there's some episodes where Holly only has one line, and it's almost like they wrote the script and then thought, oh no, we haven't given Holly anything to do, we'll have to crowbar a line in there. And even in the exposition scenes, you can kind of see them Hattie Hatridge and Robert Llewellyn sharing the exposition. So getting rid of Red Dwarf meant they could get rid of the Holly character, and although I'm sad to see, it was sad to see her go. From a story structure point of view, she's not really missed. So, putting the action all on Starbug was a great move. Although I miss Red Dwarf, the season 6 has a different kind of energy to the seasons that have gone before. It feels much more self-contained. The shows feel much more like they're taking place almost in real time, just having the characters in a single location. It's almost Faulty Towers in space that is season 6, and so there's a different energy to the series, and the idea to shake up the formula again was. I mean, it really was a smart move actually to get rid of Red Dwarf, because it really did give a new energy and a new vitality to the show, which meant it was able to carry on beyond season 6. And indeed, it was such a successful shake-up of the formula that shaking up the formula almost became the norm from then on with each series. You know, there were further changes in series 7, in 8, and it wasn't until sort of 9 or 10 that the show. So I mean, Back to Earth is you could argue is also a shaking up of the formula in a way, but I'll get on to them. But it wasn't until series 10 really that they really settled back into the classic formula, if you will. So episodes for series 6. Series 6, just on a personal level, is. It's the one that turned me into a fanatic, I'd say. It was series 4 was the one where the one series where Red Dwarf became avid viewing. Series 6 is really where I became the fanatic that I am today. It was the one I taped off the telly and first, I think, and it's definitely the series I've watched the most. A part of the reason for that is it ends on a cliffhanger. It ends on a to be continued, and there was actually a 3-year gap, or 4. I think a 3-year gap to. A 3-year wait for series 7, which just felt like an interminable time when I was 15, because I really wanted to see how they resolved the cliffhanger because it was the first time that it had ended on a cliffhanger, any of the series really, although you could maybe argue that the end of series 2 was a cliffhanger. So really, all I had to bide my time whilst I was waiting for series 7 to come along was series 6, which I just watched on repeat, and as you can see, eventually bought it on VHS. I mean, I'd watched it so much by the time I bought this that this was really just me being a collector at the time. Getting the official merchandise. But it was in that 3-year period between 6 and 7 where I really became a fan. I believe I joined I did join the fan club in that interim period, because it was then that I sort of avidly opened up Better Than Life every 3 months when it came, just for news of the new series and the excitement of seeing the new episode titles and of series 7. I went back and collected all the merchandise. I think I'd read the first book before season 6, but I read Better Than Life after watching series 6, and then went back and bought all the episodes on VHS, and they repeated the whole series as well. From the first time series 1 was repeated was in the interim period between 6 and 7. So I was able to take them all off the TV and then buy them on VHS, and collected just waves of merchandise, which I showed you in my Life as a Red Dwarf fan video. So yeah, episodes. So episodes one is Sirens. If there was an influence on this series, it was Greek mythology. It's touched on a few times. Sirens, of course, were based on the sirens from the Iliad, where is it Ulysses washes up on the shore, and he's tempted in by the sirens. The sirens in this are actually Gels who take on the form of other people. So they appear as Kachansky at one point. They appear as to tempt Lister onto the rocks, and then but when they get down there, they suck out your brains. Essentially, they turn into their more insectoid form. They pretend to be sex starved maidens at one point to tempt the cap down because that's his level of sophistication. Um, Again, but a pretty good episode. I really like this episode. I like seeing. I mean, because this is the one where it really establishes the new setup of the series. I like seeing Lister in his shaggy hair and big beard and long fingernails. He's scratching himself like that when he wakes up. It's fun. At one point, there's two Listers, and they have to determine which one's which by giving them a guitar to play, and they know it's Lister because he can play the guitar really well. A guest appearance by or what's she called? Her name escapes me. Famous British actress. She was in American Werewolf in London, and Jenny Agutter. Yes, Jenny Agutter. As she appears in a brief scene as Crichton's creator. Oh, and there's a very fun scene where Crichton gets crushed and he comes out of the crush and he's just a cube. I mean, it's not quite right because he's sort of larger than he was beforehand, but it's still a funny scene. I mean, technically, you could argue this is the point where Red Dwarf started to rely on, started to recycle old ideas. I mean, you could make an argument that this is essentially just polymorph, but without the emotion-sucking element. What with the girls changing shape and everything. But it's a fun episode, and Polymorph's very apt because there is a flat out sequel to Polymorph in this. Episode 2 is Legion. This is where the crew come and encounter a being called Legion, who seems very smart, and they want to. They want to take him with him because they believe he could get back to. He can provide answers to get them back to Earth in a matter of weeks because he's so smart. But of course, in typical fashion, he turns out to have sinister intent. He wants to keep them there for nefarious purposes. Imaginatively, Legion turns out to be a Gestalt entity. He's sort of formed when the crew turn up, and he turns out to be a conglomerate of the four main characters. For standout moments in this, the matter paddle, which are not matter paddles. I can't remember what they're called, but they have this sort of psychic cutlery that makes the food meant to float it up into their mouths, but because they can't use them properly, Rimmer just gets hit in the head with all the food. Important to note, Rimmer can get hit in the head with food in this because this is a big change. Comes in the form of Rimmer getting his hard light hologram in this. He changes from red to blue. That's how you know he's in the hard light body. So essentially, Rimmer is just as can't think of the words today. But he's essentially got a body from this point on, so he's able to interact with the crew and the stories in a way that he hasn't before. He's able to shoot bazookoids and touch things and pick things up, and whereas he hasn't to this point. And with the exception of the first half of the Gunman of the Apocalypse, he's pretty much kept the hard light body ever since. Episode 3 is one of my favourite, if not my favourite episodes. It's Gunman of the Apocalypse. This episode's got everything. It's got killer simulants. I always love the simulants when they turn up, because they're incredibly scary and funny at the same time, because they're so pseudo serious. And it's also got Crichton contracting a virus, and which manifests in a sort of dream he's having, where he's a sheriff in an old western, and then the crew enter his subconscious as characters from a western game. So it's essentially Red Dwarf in the Wild West. It's so much fun in the same way that there's something about the Wild West and science fiction, or when science fiction does westerns, that I really like. One of my favourite episodes of The Prisoner is the Wild West episode. I love Back to the Future Part 3, and I love this. I love just seeing the characters transposed to the Wild West, and it was filmed in an actual mock-up of a western town, I think in Somerset or somewhere. There's so many fun moments, the cat being the Riviera kid and just a crack shot with the pistols, Lister's riverboat knife man, and Rimmer's dangerous Dan McGraw, whose speciality is his fists, and so you get a barroom brawl when they enter the western town, but just there. So you get Rimmer beating people up, and then just ending with marvelous. So funny, and I love the ending to this one as well. It's one of my favourite endings of every episode. Essentially, they work out to contract the virus which has affected Starbug just in time. They feed it into the computer system, but is it too late? Starbug dives into a lava planet, and you think, oh god, and there's a few seconds wait, and then out the other side, and then off into the sunset, and then you get a sort of honky-tonk version of the theme tune, which I absolutely love. Absolutely fantastic ending to an episode, and possibly my favourite episode of the entire series, and it just hits every mark. It works so well. It's a really, really fun episode. Excuse me, Episode 4 we get on to, as I mentioned earlier. The original the title of this one was just Emo Hawk, but they decided it was so similar to Polymorph that they decided to call it Polymorph 2 Emo Hawk, or Emo Hawk Polymorph 2. And it's the crew crash on a planet of girls, and one of whom's played by Ainsley Harriott, no less. You can't tell. This is the one where Lister gets... they have to trade with the Gelfs in order to get spare parts, and Lister ends up getting traded off and married to a Gelf. So Lister's... for the remainder of the series, Lister's got a Gelf bride out there somewhere, a big warty hog-looking woman. But the main bulk of the story is an Emo Hawk, which is a kind of domesticated version of the polymorph getting on board. And like I mean, this is a real sort of recycling of the classic ideas episodes, because, like in Polymorph, the emo hawk gets on board and sucks out the emotions, but this time of Cat and Rimmer, but this time when he sucks them out and their personalities change, it's just an excuse to bring back some the favourite alternative characters that the cast have played in the past. So when Cat gets zapped, he turns into Dwayne Dibley, the King of Dork, who was the Cat's alter ego in Back to Reality. When Rimmer gets hit, he becomes Ace Rimmer again. So another excuse for Chris Barry to play Ace Rimmer when he was still young enough to pull it off. Oh, I'm still dreading it. I know it's coming. I should just sign myself up for it. I'm not looking forward to it. I'm getting shades of Kingdom of the Crystal Skull anxiety about it. Really enjoyable episode, even though it is a total recycle of old ideas, but still imaginatively done. Episode 5, Rimmerworld. This is one of those episodes that you find that people tend to write when they've been writing a show for very long, especially a science fiction show, and they almost start to resent the characters that they've created because they see them as trappings of their own success. And so you'll find that when a show, I found this in Doctor Who a lot, when in sort of the latter stages of a showrunner's tenure, where they start to resent the character and want to punish them a lot. And this is manifest in Rimmerworld, where Rob and Doug decided to have Rimmer crash on a planet in which he's able to make clones of himself, but because of a timey-wimey distillation thing, the remainder of the crew aren't able to get to him for 600 years. So. And of course, Rimmer being populated on a planet populated entirely of himself, it's a planet full of backstabbing weasels. So he ends up essentially trapped in a dungeon for the most of his time on there. So obviously this is how the writers were feeling, sort of trapped in a dungeon, which may be very telling that this is the penultimate episode that was penned by Rob Grant. But a very funny episode. The female concubines that look like Chris Barry are a particular standout for me. And the line, I would create a mate. I mean, technically she would be my sister, and unable to take me as a mate. After much soul searching, I came to the conclusion, what the hell? I just wouldn't tell her. A very funny episode. Episode 6, Out of Time. This was kind of cobbled together at the last minute. It was there's the famous story about this episode is that for much of if you watch the episode, a lot of the time the crew were actually working off cue cards because the script was so late in being delivered that it really wasn't up to scratch. And apparently Robert Llewellyn even says at one point they were rewriting, because it was like on a prompter, they were rewriting the script even as they were recording it. That's how last minute it was. So for that, I mean, it's not a bad episode. There are a few little moments where maybe it lags here and there, but on the but it doesn't really show that this was cobbled together in the last minute. There are examples, I think in 7 and 8 especially, of shows that were cobbled together at the last minute that shows a lot more. The basic plot is that the crew get the time drive and then end up meeting their future selves, who've been hobnobbing with the most awful people throughout history, and so they meet their future selves from 15 years in the future, which is fun to see because Rimmer's now really fat and Cat's really bald, and Lister's just a brain in a jar. The original title for this was R.I.P. David Lister because apparently Craig Charles was going around having read the first draft of the script saying it wasn't very good, so they decided to jokingly the writers played a trick on him, in which they hinted they were going to kill him off. Like I said, this one ends on the cliffhanger that I was thinking was going to be resolved in 12 months, and it turned out to be sort of 38 months, whole months later, an interminable amount of time to wait for season 7 to come along. And then when it did come along, it was all changed from there. But series 6, this one, like series 4, I'd say, holds a special place in my heart because this is, this was my gateway. This is the one where I fell in love big time and with the show and became a lifelong fan. So and I think it's a fine series. It's a real. A very unique series in many ways. There isn't another series of the show quite like this one, where you still had the original writing staff. The ideas were still firing on all cylinders, but it had its own unique energy to it, and it contains Gunmen of the Apocalypse, so it's. I've got a lot of time for Series 6. It's the one I've watched the most, definitely. So I'm going to wrap it up there, folks. Join me for my next video where I'll be looking at Series 7 and Episode 4 of Series 12, which I think is called M Corp, but I might be getting that wrong. But whatever it's called, join me for that video then. And until next time, folks, this is me, Big Buddha, signing off, and I shall see everyone out there in YouTube land.